Welcome to the Parents at Work podcast, a podcast for parents who want to succeed at work while also raising children. My name is Mihalich-Levin. I'm a healthcare lawyer. I'm a founder of a program called Mindful Return that helps employers to retain their new parent top talent. And I'm mama to two wonderful redheaded boys. I'm joined by my co-host here today, my amazing husband, Jason Levin. Hey, Jason.
Hello, Lori. It's always a pleasure to be the husband of Lori Mihalich-Levin. I founded Ready, Set, Launch LLC 10 years ago, where I help executives make career and retirement transitions, get the promotion, and grow their professional services practice. And so this month, we've been focusing on the very interesting profession of fundraising. We just completed our Moms in Fundraising, and today we're super lucky to be doing Dads in Fundraising, where we have two really interesting fundraisers, both Mark Versen and Dale Wright. I'll start with Mark. Mark Versen is Chief Development Officer of Lutheran Family Services of Nebraska. In 2020, Mark set a record for total annual fundraising by hitting $7 million, including the largest gift in Lutheran Family Services history of 128 years of $3 million, while surpassing 22% growth in total number of donors. Mark is a seasoned advancement professional with experience in private and public higher education institutions and executive leadership in the health and human services nonprofit sector. He's a firm believer that philanthropy changes lives. Mark and his wife, Jessie, have two children residing in Louisville, Nebraska. Braylon, his 12-year-old daughter, an active competitive volleyball player, fisher, and fundraiser in her own right. So it's all in the family. And Zegan, his 8-year-old son, is all boy and enjoys his video games, sports, reading, and his beloved companion, Anna, who is his 5-year-old pit bull.
Awesome, Mark. We're excited to have you here, and I want to hear more about Braylon's own fundraising, too. Dale Wright is also with us today. We're really excited to have him here. He serves as Associate Dean and Chief Advancement Officer for the Granger College of Engineering at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He's responsible for the strategy and operations in fundraising and constituent engagement, and he's the campaigns director for the college's $550 million goal in the With Illinois $2.25 billion comprehensive campaign. As of today, the college is at 109% of its goal. Over the last 20 plus years, Dale has held a variety of alumni and fundraising engagement roles in higher education. He's an active case volunteer and also holds membership in organizations such as the African American Development Officers Network, the Association of Fundraising Professionals, and he's involved in other nonprofit work as well, including serving on the executive committee of the board of directors for the American Legion Boys State of Missouri. Dale loves his family and knows he wouldn't be where he is today without the support of his wife, Chrissy, and his daughters, his 4 daughters, Cadence, who's 11, Milana, who's 9, and twins, Leighton and Isla, who are 4. Welcome, Dale and Mark. You are both in the thick of working parenthood for sure. Glad to have you here today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Absolutely. So, Mark, let's start with you. Please, if you would, tell us a little bit about your own working parent story.
Sure. Mine's, I think, a little bit different than many. Mine happened on an accident. And when I was actually still in college, I played basketball in college, and my wife and I found out we were going to be blessed with a daughter. Then had her the day of my blue and gray scrimmage my senior year. So, as most college athletes, you don't expect one to get into that situation potentially or have to work during that situation because it's a full-time commitment. So I didn't have that luxury. So I got kind of thrown into it right away. I actually started working at the airport because it was the only one that the timing worked. So I was out there from 4:00 in the morning till 6 or 7 in the morning to get off to go to individual weights or conditioning or practice, to go to class and flip-flop and with my wife and our daughter back and forth because we couldn't afford daycare, to flip again for practice and weights and study table, to swap again for night class for my wife, and then swap again for me to go back out to the airport until 1:00 in the morning. So that's how I got thrown into my working parent story. From after graduation, I think and Dale could probably attest to this too, that in fundraising, no one really sets out to become a fundraiser, right? When you're 5 years old and someone says, what do you want to be? Of the likes of, I want to be a firefighter, right? No one says, I want to be a fundraiser. But somebody just says, hey, I think you should do this. I think you'd like it and be good at it. And my basketball coach actually said, "Hey, there's a job at the Alumni Foundation and I think you'd like it and I think you'd be good at it." So fell into advancement and he was right. I love it. And I've been fundraising ever since. We moved every couple of years, which it can be challenging, right? In the sense of uprooting your children and lives for new opportunities. And so, it's been a whirlwind. We're now settled, which is great. I'm off the road of travel, which was the biggest thing. I think the hardest part was I spent 267 nights on the road one year, traveling for work. And,
wow.
With two kids and ultimately my wife being a single mom, it was challenging. And so thankfully for technology, we were able to FaceTime at games and everything else. But, that balance was very challenging to navigate through. And again, I'm really fortunate to have a supporting partner that really recognized that, hey, this is something that this is our lifestyle for now, knowing that there will be an end in sight. But it was navigating the road warrior life as well as then when you're home and giving that reprieve to the wife and building that relationship with my kids. It was, it's been a whirlwind of a transition from that to now I'm home all the time, which is so much welcomed, but it's been interesting. So I've been in advancement now for about 10 years and really love that I get to integrate my family into my work. And that's been a joy of mine as well.
Wow, Mark, I think entering parenthood and working parenthood is always dramatic and exhausting, but what you described takes dramatic and exhausting to a totally new level.
It made us stronger for it. We'll say that.
Yes.
Because when you look at the time demands, not only of being a college student, but being a student athlete, which is in and of itself a full-time commitment, and then you add parenthood on top.
And a job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where did you find your inspiration? I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, honestly, it was my daughter, right? It was not even a hesitation. We had to do it. And, my wife, she worked 40, 50 hours a week as well. And so we were very fortunate that we had a community behind us that helped us out. That, it was funny because we counted up one time and just started listing off names that helped us out, from my teammates to colleagues to teachers to our my coaches to red shirts that, fortunately our coach would say, to one of our red shirts, "Hey, you got Braylon for this practice because Mark has her today." We counted over 120 people that had supported us and watched our daughter in a 2-year span to help us out. And, so my inspiration really came from, we got to do it for her. She deserves a life and a chance to really flourish in her own right. And then also we just, I don't know, it was a self-pride thing of navigating through and really just saying we can do this and we'll eventually get to a place where we're comfortable and happy. But, for now, we just, we got to do it in any which way we can. So we're also very fortunate that she was a great kid because we didn't have a true schedule. So we didn't have the regular cadence of, nap time here or bedtime here. It was sometimes she was at Applebee's until 1:00 in the morning and people taking turns watching her throughout the shift. And so it was, it was interesting, but she was definitely our inspiration of just wanting to make sure that we gave her the opportunity to have the life she deserves.
Wow. And what an incredible use of your village, really. I mean, that concept of having that community who can step in and relying on them has been something we've been desperately missing during COVID. And it really highlights how important that is in those early years. Thank you, Mark, for sharing your story. Yeah. Dale, over to you. Let's hear your working parent story. How did it all begin?
Yeah, so nothing quite as exciting as Mark. And Mark, I remember when I first met you, hearing all that and thinking, wow, that is incredible. And I've just been so pleased to see how you and your family have grown over the years, and just truly remarkable story of love. Really, love does really conquer all, right? So, so for me, like I said, nothing too dramatic. So we found out in late 2008 that my wife and I that we were gonna be early 2009 that we found out we'd be first time parents, and so that was really, it was a really exciting time for us. We were both at our alma mater, the University of Missouri. Both of us, doing very well in our careers. And so, what a fun time. And we were finishing up a big $1 billion campaign at the university. So at first it was like, wow, this is going to be great. The campaign's going to be over. We're going to be new parents. So we'll get a little bit of a time to ease into new parenthood, and as the university sort of goes on our sort of thanking tour, if you will. And then somewhere in 2009, our dean announced that he was going to be retiring, and he had been our dean. I was in the business school, and he had been a dean for 20 years. so then I immediately thought, uh-oh. So we're getting a new dean, probably not from the faculty, which means whoever comes in is going to want to, get out and be on the road and those types of things. And so I remember, at that time before kids, I was traveling, like Mark mentioned, a pretty fair amount of time, right? And so my wife and I had been married for 4 years already. So we had kind of gotten used to that cadence. And then it was that, wait a minute, what happens here if now we have a kid and I'm traveling? And if it has to ramp up, under a new dean and things like that. And so that was something that we had to do a little bit of soul searching. And luckily, right, like we had such a great network that I was able to lean on other folks who had been, in this position and, gave us really good words of wisdom and things to sort of to be on the lookout for. And what was really helpful to me, I think, was having I knew a lot of working moms who were the development professional. Mm-hmm. And so they were able to share, some pretty unique perspectives, even with my wife, in terms of what happens when you're sort of all alone and those sorts of things. And so it worked out, fine, I think, for us. And I was fortunate that the new dean at the time, came on board, understood, and, was pretty flexible with me, certainly in those early months of Cadence's life. And so, and we just kind of, it's amazing what you can get used to and learn from. And so it worked out fine. And, Cadence, sooner than maybe we thought, became a big sister and, and matured right up and was very helpful to mom, at that point when Milana was born. And then as we transitioned here, taking a job here at Illinois, we got the surprise of our lives when we found out right as we were basically, kind of finishing up the blueprints for our new home that we were building, that we were pregnant again, and this time with twins.
The number of kids right there.
And so at that point, I think my wife was like, wait a minute, you just moved us, a few hundred miles away. We're building this house. You've got this big position at the University of Illinois in this huge campaign, and the public phase is just about to get launched, and we're having twins.
Surprise! Oh my goodness, Dale! Wow.
Yeah.
Bless your soul, Dale.
Yeah, and ironically enough, I'm a twin, so so we were able to lean on my mom a little bit for some advice there, which was mainly her just laughing at the situation.
And somehow you're still here, and you've survived 4 years of the 4-girl thing.
Yeah, I have to say, I would shout out to my mother-in-law as well, who has come and helped us out many times too. Yeah. So 2 great moms there to help us out throughout all this.
Wonderful, wonderful. So Dale, I want to stick with you for our next question, and then we'll turn to Mark. I'm wondering if you can generalize a little bit and say what it's like to be a parent in the fundraising industry, profession rather.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So it's interesting, and I certainly have reflected a lot on this, especially during the pandemic when I was actually, thankfully able to be around my family, truly, really for the first time. I felt like in many respects, because I just didn't have, I haven't traveled for work in now going on 19 months or so. Wow. Which neither of my daughters have, none of the daughters have ever experienced, But I will say that what's interesting is that, much like this tends to be sort of a male-dominated field in terms of like leadership, right? I certainly have looked back and realized, wow, I was probably granted some sort of grace or just my career probably flourished because, I had such a great wife, right, who was able to really manage and balance out like all these things while also herself, growing in her career. So, I've been really grateful for how grounded she kept me in terms of making certain that I was, being a parent. And I think that's been the tough thing for some fundraisers sometimes, that like it's hard for us to turn the fundraiser off. In us. And, I was just really fortunate that my wife was always kept me grounded in that, like the most important job I have is being a parent and a husband. Right.
Yeah.
And then that was where I really tried to keep my focus. And I think ultimately it made me a better leader and a better fundraiser. Certainly, as I practice better listening skills, as I have no shortage of opinions every day, but which I need to navigate.
Yeah, we heard the same thing when we talked to the moms in fundraising about it being sort of an always on, being so driven by the mission that you want to keep doing it all the time, and really trying to figure out how to install those boundaries so that you can turn off that fundraising hat and turn on the family time. And just curious, before we go over to Mark, whether I know you said your wife was a really amazing support in that regard. Is there anything else that you found really helpful in setting those boundaries and being able to turn off to be with your family?
I think really the biggest thing is that, like, just what the pandemic taught us, and particularly in higher education fundraising, was, I think we always knew this, and I certainly felt this as I tried to balance, which was just like, wait, if the goal of ours is to make the connection, and so then we really should be focused on what makes the donor more comfortable. And I found over time that, as you built that rapport with donors, they didn't need us. They didn't need to be in front of us or us in front of them 3 to 4 times a year or a month or whatever we convinced ourselves, right? In order to earn those hotel points and airline miles, right? And so I kind of was reminded of that even before the pandemic, and certainly during the pandemic, right? Where it's just amazing what you can kind of get used to. And so going forward now, I'd say to my team now, I'm like, look, I'm not sure we should by default think that we're just going to get back out there and just qualify people in person again, right? And that's such a big component of our jobs, right? And so, like, how do we leverage, this ability that we've like that was always there, but we've now discovered that we could actually do in terms of like building that rapport. And how do we balance it out to make certain that we keep our families, whether that family is, human or furry-legged friends or what have you, right? But like, what are those other things that are important that help motivate us in our current jobs that we need to be mindful of that need to remain important to us as we return to whatever the next normal is, for our work.
Yeah, it sounds like there's an opportunity here for a real fundamental shift in the profession. And I love that you're looking at that question critically as we move into the next couple of months.
This episode of the Parents at Work podcast is brought to you by Ready, Set, Launch, a boutique career coaching firm that supports executives in career and retirement transitions, as well as building their professional services practices. I'm Jason Levin, and I've been supporting executives achieving their goals in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors for the past 10 years. Based on those experiences, I decided to write a book called Relationships to Infinity: The Art and Science of Keeping in Touch. We say keep in touch, but we struggle to do so. I wrote this book so that my readers could have proven research-based tactics to keep in touch and reap all the benefits. I'm excited about this book, and I know that you will too. Head over to readysetlaunch.net or connect with me on LinkedIn to learn more about the book. I'd be happy to learn more about your goals and your organization and how there might be a fit. Again, head over to readysetlaunch.net to get back in touch. Now, back to our episode.
Over to you, Mark. Can you tell us a little bit about, what you would say it is like to be a parent in the fundraising profession?
Yeah. And Dill, I can relate to you in the sense of turning it off. That's one thing that I have a hard time doing. That is actually something I continuously struggle with and need to work on, because I think predominantly those in fundraising are very extroverted individuals in a sense, or at least in conversation, maybe not in the sense of in their personal lives of, I'm going to go out and be friends with everybody, but that's who I am. I mean, we'll be sitting at the lake, at the beach, and all of a sudden I'm talking to 2 random people that I get their life story. And it's just like, it's not so much that I'm trying to do the fundraising side of it, but that's just kind of wired into me. But, I think one thing that I would say about being a parent in this industry is the balance is hard to find. And why I say that, take the travel out of it, even now that I'm more grounded and look, I traveled maybe before the pandemic, my first year, I traveled 7 nights, and that was for speaking engagements around the country or so forth. Compared to 267, I'll take that any day of the week to be home with the family. But it's different, right? Because now it's maybe longer nights in the office or more dinners. Like even tonight, we're going on vacation tomorrow, and I have a dinner with a potential new board member tonight from 6:30 to 8. Well, by the time you get home and settled and everything else, summer, it's fine. The kids are up a little bit later, but during the school year, if you're having 2 or 3 dinners in a week, you all of a sudden miss out on your family time at night. So, I would say that it's a challenging profession to be a working parent in, and it takes a good partnership. Honestly, I can't say it enough that if it wasn't for my wife, I would have really had to consider a different profession, because she is the one that's really held down the fort at home and takes on the good, the bad, and the ugly of being with the kids, and the responsibility of caretaker to get to practice at 6 in one location, to drop the other off at practice at 6:30 in another, and then back to pick up. I mean, so that balance is challenging. It's something that I continuously struggle with, to be honest with you, is being able to find that balance. Obviously, COVID threw that all for a loop. It was, being home and not leaving the house for over a year. It forced the hand of we need to figure out what that balance looks like better. And it's some things that we've been able to take forward. Say, for example, even last night, just taking the dog for a walk down to the mailbox and playing catch with the football while we do it. It's little things like that we took for granted before of what we were able to do. So, I think the easiest way to describe it is it's a challenge. It's a challenging profession because it's an ever-changing climate, especially now coming off of the pandemic. But, one conversation is never the same as the other. And so it's the inconsistency within the role itself can be challenging to navigate from a mental psyche standpoint of, what is today going to bring? And, switching from my background in higher ed to the health and human services world, it's so vastly different in so many ways, and the affinity, trying to build affinity in health and human services versus you have a new set of donors that are graduating 3 times a year from their alma mater. So identifying that the conversations are different, the impact is different, the clientele is different. And so for me too, one of the challenges of working in the profession was learning the new profession. There are so many things that I was naive about within the child welfare system or around refugee and immigration, but even the behavioral health side of it that I'm extremely passionate about from some personal and, family matters that I've lived with my entire life and so forth. It's a big learning curve. And I think that that's one of the challenges within the profession is when you don't go to school for this, you fall into it. Someone says you'll be good at it. Say you were in sales, you'll be good at, well, you don't sometimes see the fruits of your labor. You don't see that ROI, that success hit rate that you may see in another field in the time frame that you'd like to see it. If it takes 12 to 18 months to close a major gift and the turnover rate is at 14 months, well, if people aren't seeing the work that they're doing come to fruition for that satisfaction and that gratification, it's challenging. And I think that all plays into it of, you have longer hours. You're not with your family as much. You're not with that network that we talked about earlier as much. And you have to find that balance, but it's hard to do so because sometimes, as Dale, you're 100% right that I think it's changing a lot of how frequently do we need to see some people and convincing yourself that it's okay to step back. And, so I think that identifying some of those changes of what that's going to be coming out of the pandemic is going to be so vitally important for all organizations and especially for all of us that have fallen in love with this profession.
Yeah.
I mean, what I find fascinating in hearing Dale talk and hearing you talk is you're 2 road warriors. And I didn't really fully comprehend the face-to-face component of what it's like to be a fundraiser. And, there's this whole conversation nationally about, going back to office. But what I'm hearing from both of you is a sub-conversation on, do we need to be in people's offices or in people's faces yeah. at all? Well, not at all, but frequent rate, which I find really fascinating.
Yeah, I was also reflecting on how you both talked about how important a supportive partner has been in all of this. And when we talked to the moms in fundraising, we definitely heard a similar theme. I mean, one of the moms had a father who was a stay-at-home dad and took care of all of that. And it allowed her to navigate some of the time constraints and demands, and really sort of this equal partnership was really helpful and important. So I think it does take the team to make this sort of career work.
Yeah, I think both of you have had your teams and then your extended communities. Mm-hmm. For Dale, it's been family and the in-laws and those kinds of things. And for Mark, you've just had a myriad of people that have been supportive, which is absolutely wonderful. As we're talking about support, and I want to go to Dale on this, what workplace supports did you find particularly helpful as you became a working parent?
Back in the early days when they were being born. Or I guess it wasn't so long ago that your twins were born too.
That's right. I will say that I think with the exception of one manager, everyone else was just so understanding. And this might not be the case for everyone because, no one's required to have children, right? But I think what helped was I had always worked with folks for the most part who themselves were parents. Mm-hmm. And so I think there was just that sort of natural camaraderie that came with that and comes with that. And I think, certainly in higher ed, right? Like it's, there's just, and we've been at two big public research universities, and all of our daughters have had the experience of being able to attend for their preschool, the respective child development research labs. And so that really helped as well, because they focus as much on the parents and supporting the parents as they do the development of the children, right? Like they really do teach us to really be, these mutual partners here in that aspect. And I've actually found those experiences to be very comforting. And also you're right, like your kids are around other, parents, and there's that community that sort of builds there. And that was helpful for me to meet folks who worked in different roles than I did, or different jobs that really kind of let me see what it was like for them as well, and how they sort of balance things out too. So I would say that I've just been really fortunate to have, again, great coworkers and certainly supervisors that understood. And then for me, just the unique experience of the child development laboratory experience has just been phenomenal.
Very cool.
So Mark, what workplace supports did you find helpful as you became a working parent?
Yeah, I think it's very similar to Dale. I've had great managers and supervisors that truly understand it. And I would say the biggest thing that they gave me was flexibility, knowing that your workday in a fundraising role is not your traditional, 8 to 5, because you may have to be up at 7 for at a breakfast by 7, so then they can get to work by 8, or you're having a dinner after hours, or homecoming. I mean, I think about homecoming, Dale, and I know that you could probably relate to this too. Homecoming was always just a crazy, crazy week and weekend in higher ed. And so, knowing that whether you want a comp time or just recognizing that, look, we all need some reprieve. I had some phenomenal bosses that just take the time that you need. And if I needed to run for the day, I think of one time I was working at Colorado College, actually, and my son was challenging when he was a baby, we'll say that. And my wife called in tears and just said, I need a break. And I remember my boss just sitting there. I was like, I'm hesitant, right? I was still young, and go in there, and she didn't have kids. And I said, look, I need to run home for a couple hours and what's going on. And, was able to talk through what it was. I just said, oh, get out of here. Don't even come back for the rest of the day. Just go take care of it. Give Jesse a break and everything else. And so, I think that support system there was huge. The other thing that I think within the fundraising industry, whether it's higher ed or health and human services, there's so many opportunities to bring your family into your work, whether it's events or, for me, my wife has helped me close big gifts without me even realizing it, and my kid even, it's a funny story. When I was at North Dakota State's Foundation, one of our donors was up and invited us over to the Holiday Inn, and they have a pirate pool there. And we were playing catch, having drinks, eating pizza and swimming. And all of a sudden my son chucks a football and just drills this donor right in the face. And it was at that moment that he committed to a 6-figure gift. It's like, so, I think if you can embrace those opportunities to get them involved, whether it's a football game or homecoming or an event, or bring them to your work, whatever it may be, that's always been a pretty good support system as well, to have those be allowed.
Wow. What a story. I guess everybody needs to be hit in the face with a football.
What was it, a regular football or a Nerf football?
No, it was a little Nerf football. So,
okay.
Yeah. And I still talk to that donor to this day, even not at NDSU. It's funny what you bring, if you can bring your family and personal life into the mix with some donors, that it's more real, that trust is there, and it can really help in those relationships too.
That's amazing. I mean, it sounds like, Dale, and you have been very blessed in having supportive supervisors. Continuing on this theme of, becoming a parent while you're a fundraiser, what supports didn't you have, but you think other parents might benefit from looking back?
So I would say something that I hit on before, and Mark was getting at it too, was that I think there needs to be more honesty in how we train our, our fundraisers and the frame of mind, right? Because I do think both Mark and I grew up in a time where it was, the traits that were seen as the most desirable in the profession were the road warriors, right? Like, these are the people who are willing to, they were willing to travel in the middle of the night and be gone for weeks at a time and, all those types of things. But did we ever really look back on that and say, well, what was that the best thing for them? Like not just from a actual productivity standpoint, from just like larger, like health, those sorts of things. And so I look back on a lot of this, Jason, and I say, wow, I can't, there are times where I'm like, I can't believe I'm still in this profession, quite candidly, just with some of the attitudes or the ways in which, we really thought about like how the relationship building. And so that's something that I've been really focused on, is trying to be better at helping my team and those that I mentor be much better about actually focusing on how deeply we can build relationships and the myriad of ways that we should be looking into that, and not trying to have this sort of all roads still lead back to this sole singular approach to our work.
Great.
That's brilliant. Mark, what do you think?
Yeah, similar tone. I think that, I've mentioned a couple of times that we fall into this profession, right? There's no formal education. There's more coming about now, right? With the program at Indiana, I believe Texas was working on an undergrad program, a bachelor's program in philanthropy and studies and so forth. But there's no onboarding workbook. I think that's consistent of bringing us into the fold of being fundraisers. And there's a false perception of what fundraising is still. Even some of my family, I was at a family reunion 2 weeks ago for my grandparents' 65th wedding anniversary with 70 family and members from all across the country, all in different roles and everything else. And then when it comes to fundraising, the common thing, and Dale, I'm sure you get this all the time. So you just ask for money, and it's that's not what we do, right? I mean, there's so much more to it. And frankly, we do our job right. I never really have had to really ask for the money. It's more of we're coming to an agreement on making an impact. So I think that is something that, setting those boundaries up front with individuals. I mean, I think that's something that I've taken into my leadership here at LFS as well. We work hard, we work weird hours. We have to have that flexibility, but also clear expectations is, here's what we need to do. And that's something that there's not a guidebook or a playbook that you can go off of, because it's different for every organization. But I mean, there's some common underlying factors that come into play, but there isn't a written rule to what we do. And so, I guarantee you the way Dale goes about fundraising is different than I do. Both have been successful, but you can't put it on paper to say, this is how you do it. Right. And I think that's probably one of the challenges of what support systems maybe we don't have in our profession. But, it's something that I continuously am trying to figure out what that balance is as well, because it is, we're all different and go about it in different ways.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Okay. So we end every one of our episodes by asking our guests 3 specific questions, which I'm going to toss over to you. Let's start with you, Mark. What's your number one best piece of advice for navigating life as a working parent? Number one book, and number one piece of technology?
Great questions. Number one piece of advice, and I tell myself this, and I mean it, I'm continuously working on it, is shut it off. And I struggle with it. I'm even talking to some people about it and everything else, but how to shut it off, because we live in an era that we are connected 24/7, right? Whether it's through your phone, whether it's social, whatever it may be, we're constantly connected. And so finding a way to shut it off is just so important. And we have to take care of ourselves. That's why I got out of higher ed as a road warrior, because I had a couple health challenges that were from stress and wasn't able to shut off and so forth. So number one piece of advice, I would definitely say, find a way to shut it off, whether it's camping, fishing, running, whatever it may be. So find a way to shut it off. Number one book, I have to be very candid with you. I'm not a big reader. I like short little snippets, but one that I've always loved was Good to Great. That's a book that I've always liked. And then number one piece of technology, that's interesting. I love technology, and there's so many different tools that you can have in this workspace now. But one that I'm fascinated with, I haven't personally used it, but for those that are in fundraising thinking or looking at this, it's a company called Gravity, and it's a software that uses starting to bring artificial intelligence into fundraising. And I think that there is a huge huge opportunity for our field to kind of get with some of the times within AI. And I think they do a great job and look forward to hopefully being able to use that at some point. So that's, I would say, anything AI right now getting into fundraising, I'm pretty fascinated with.
Cool. Thanks, Mark. Over to you, Dale, with the same questions. Piece of advice, number one book, number one piece of technology.
Sure. So the number one piece of advice is something that I say constantly to teams or groups that I speak with is I live by this phrase, habit forming is habit performing. And so what I mean by that is, be mindful of the habits that you're picking up or that you're introducing, because ultimately that really does dictate how you perform in life, right? Like workplace, personal life, that sort of thing. And so that's something that just sticks with me, has stuck with me for many years. And I just finally just sort of shorten it down into that phrase. In terms of book, wow. So one that I've been promoting a lot lately, it's a collection of Martin Luther King speeches and sermons, and it's called All Labor Has Dignity. Mm-hmm. And it's all about labor rights and economic justice, which is I think is really, really important, especially to fundraisers to think back, and especially as we think about growing, every one of us is reading all these articles about the growing diversity that we need to have in our pipeline in fundraising, right? But oftentimes we don't really understand the historical context there that might be leading to us still having challenges in terms of inviting and involving more folks than what has been our traditional basis, if you will. And also, it's just the King. I mean, he's just amazing, right? Like for such a short life, the impact that he had. And so I'm always trying to get people to read that. And then in terms of technology, Mark brought up something that I think is really interesting, and it is in this AI space. But one of the things, the crusades I'm on right now, is kind of related to what I said before about this economic justice. And one of the things that I find really disconcerting is the algorithms that we sort of use in our field to try to identify who's the best prospect, right? And so we tend to still deploy algorithms, particularly in advancement, like zip codes and things, right, that have proven to be discriminatory. Mm-hmm. And we take some of these tools that have proven to be discriminatory in a larger sense, but have made them we have made them the gatekeeper, if you will, as to who our fundraisers or our presidents or chancellors or who should be sort of engaging as we try to break out these large databases, that we increasingly have. And from a technology standpoint, I'm hopeful that as AI and machine learning, as that improves, that hopefully advancement through tools like Mark mentions, like Gravity, will take more of those things into consideration in our work as we go forward.
And not bake biases into the systems that are being.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
No, there's a lot of bias in AI, and I love what you're talking about in terms of looking at a holistic approach to opportunity, really. So that's brilliant.
Great.
Well, I am so happy, Dale and Mark, that we had a chance to have this conversation. It was so rich. I feel like I have learned so much more about what it really takes to succeed in fundraising, to hear both of your parent journeys. Thank you both for your time.
Yeah, really excited to have been here with you today. Thank you, Dale. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you both.
Thank you both. Yeah, Mark, it's so great to catch up, my friend.
Likewise, Dale.
Great. So if you enjoyed the Parents at Work podcast, please share it with one friend, perhaps a friend who is in the fundraising profession, and go ahead and leave us a quick review on whatever source you found your podcast today. Thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to tuning in with you again next time.